Hello everyone and welcome to Malmö Konsthall and the second seminar in anticipation of Malmö Artists Books Biennial. My name is Joakim Norling and I will be your host and moderator of tonight. A little bit about practicalities first. There will be around 50 minutes of presentations to start with, then a 10-minute break, and you will hear that horn sounding at the end of it. And then it's time to hurry into the hall again. And after that, we'll have a discussion for 30 or 45 minutes. And of course, questions from the audience are very welcome at that point. Yes, we're at Malmö Konsthall and there's a focus on the bookshop this year and lots of activities. Maybe you've been to the presentation of Copenhagen Flipbook Nest right now. And there's also a very interesting cabinet from Pages, the artist's book fair in Leeds. And I'm sure John, who's here, will talk a little about that, hopefully. And also a very fine display of artist books from the collections of Thomas Millroth and Bengt Adlers. So please have a look at that in the during the intermission. Last Wednesday, 3 publishers from Denmark and Skåne were here, and there was an introduction by Thomas Millroth outlining the history of artist books in this region. Also here was Marika Reuterswärd, head of Kristianstad Konsthall, who brought an institutional perspective to the table. Tonight we have 4 distinguished international book artists and visiting us. Maddy Rosenberg from Brooklyn. She's an artist and curator and runs Central Booking, a gallery for artists' books in New York City. Yeah. Antoine Lefebvre, he's the head of Antoine Lefebvre Editions. You wouldn't have guessed. Also a book artist and a independent curator. And from 2009 to 2013, he created a virtual artist book publisher called La Bibliothèque Fantastique. Lina Nordenström is the Swedish representative. Together with her husband, she runs Grafikverkstan Godsmagasinet in Uttersberg in the middle of Sweden. And she's an artist, of course, and a printmaker, not least. John McDowall is based in London and Bradford in the UK. He's an artist and a curator, and he has been doing Pages, the artist book festival in Leeds, for 20 years together with Chris Taylor. Am I right? Thank you. Very soon these wonderful people will talk a little, but I would like to start by quoting a little from Johanna Drucker's The Century of Artists Books. In the afterword, she talks about a passage in Emily Bronte's novel Wuthering Heights. The narrator, Mr. Lockwood, finds an old pile of books which used to belong to Catherine Earnshaw, one of the main protagonists of the novel. And the books are in a dilapidated state, and there are scrawls from Catherine's pen all over the pages. Some of them are just detached sentences, but some of them form a running diary throughout the various books. And of course, Mr. Lockwood is enchanted by this discovery. And I'll quote Johanna Drucker. The process of intimate discovery described in this passage is fundamental to the experience of the book as a form. From its many daily functions to its metaphoric existence, the book has the potential to provide a private space for communication and exchange across vast spaces of time and geography. And Drucker goes on to say that this is especially true of artists' books, which not only contain words, but investigate other aspects of the book and take design and book craft further than novels. They also travel through time and space without the author really knowing what will happen to them. However, last Wednesday, some of the participants talked about their urge to insert the book into a specific time and space frame. For example, Forlaget Gestus in Copenhagen, they have a site-specific concept where the book enters into dialogue with the exhibition space. And here's an image from their latest exhibition and book by the Norwegian artist Ingrid Furre, which was presented in a hotel room in Copenhagen for 1 week, where you could book an appointment. And I think today's panelists also have worked quite a lot with bringing the book into virtual and physical space, and I hope we get the opportunity to talk a little bit about that. So I would like to welcome Maddy Rosenberg. Welcome to Malmö.
Thank you, and I want to thank everybody for bringing me here. It's a real pleasure, and my first time to Sweden too. So I'm very glad that I can bring my practice and my gallery to your attention. I started Central Booking 9 years ago, but before that, I had a long career as a book artist. This was one of the first books that I did, Reptiles, which was was done specifically to be not a one-of-a-kind, but an edition book, really done specifically to be an artist book. I come to artist books as a printmaker, and I had been making books since I was a child, not really knowing that's what I was making. But I was very sculptural, putting objects together with my writing, being both interested in writing and interested in as an artist. I always wanted to be an artist. And the funny thing is, though, my books, since I come from printmaking, usually don't contain much written text in it. I always think of the image more as text. And for me, printmaking was too flat and and I would often do sequential prints anyway. So for books, it was really an opportunity for me to put in time and to put in movement and to also play with the two-dimensional becoming three-dimensional, which is why I often like the accordion book structure that can be pulled at. This particular book can be pulled out, can be created into many different sculptural ways of viewing it. These are both miniature books. They both fit in the palm of my hand. And the Prague, Memory Prague on the right is particularly my book with words. It has word repeated constantly, because when I had seen some curator who had said to me, but these aren't artist books, there's no words in it, and so I put some words in this book. And of course it became a texture and it became a visual accent. And the book on the left is also, combines the idea of a portfolio in unbound and separate pages that are still meant to be very sequential. This is my reptile book, and this is when I'm starting to experiment of bringing one page into the other and viewing two images through very different kind of framing devices. It's probably my most Gothic work. I do like, what I do love about Europe is that I can gather such wonderful imagery over here, and it's authentic. In New York, I've seen a lot of this imagery too, but it's faux. I did grow up in New York, by the way, and I think that's why I am so attracted to this kind of imagery. People think of New York as a very modern city, but for me, it's mostly a 19th century city. The skyscrapers didn't come till later, and they're a very small part of the city, although they are starting to take over now. But when I was growing up, it was still a very low 19th century city where people actually lived. This is a book that I did in collaboration. I started doing collaborations with other artists who asked me, and found that, like a lot of things in life that I hadn't thought of myself, that it was a wonderful way of getting outside of myself. And it was neither my work nor his work, it was our work. And it was a great way of thinking that way, just letting go of your ego and contributing what you could to create something that both of you were interested in. This was actually the second one we did. The first one was flatter, and we decided this collaboration, we were going to really go back and forth instead of having separate pages, and really integrate. And after years and years, this was pre-internet, so he had to physically send things. He was in Austria, and I was in New York, back and forth. So it took close to 6 years to complete. And when we did complete it, it's turned out basically there was my side and his side, after all the going back and forth. But it does fold down flat, as you can see, and then becomes totally three-dimensional. This is my flip book, and it is The Dance of Death in 3 parts. So when you flip it, the different parts of the skeleton actually do dance for you. And it's all hidden away into a small handmade box. This is dystopia, and here again, people often ask me, why dystopia? I don't think people ask me about that anymore in the current situation, but for me, it was dystopic because I took images of actual buildings that existed in places all over and created an amalgam city, which was basically one that could not really be entered or lived in. So even though it looked quite pleasant when you looked at it, when you actually started understanding what was going on there, it was a city without inhabitants. And you can see, again, it folds completely into looking more like a traditional codex book, and then it pulls out to become a truly three-dimensional city. And then I started bringing from doing individual works as well, and I was meeting curators and meeting librarians who were collecting artist books and developing a collector base, and then also trying to play with the books rather than just exhibiting them as is, but really create other environments for this. This was in the Brooklyn Public Library, which had 6 of these cases. And instead of, again, just exhibiting the book in this piece, you do see the complete book in the center there, but to really pull it out and create an entire environment for it. And you will see that that also is how I think about curating as well. This is my Berlin bestiary, and this too it's three-dimensional on both sides. It pops out. The framing device is all from actual stone mausoleums, from the cemetery in Weissensee in Berlin. And then the bestiaries are actually beasts that I had photographed around the city. Normally, I had always used photography as for gathering my references as a sketchbook device. And then with the internet and with also being able to do digital on the computer, I started playing around more with the photographs and actually being part of the work. Here again is how I was bringing this Berlin bestiary. I took aspects of the actual book, and in another library, cases in Philadelphia at the Free Library, I took aspects of the book and created a three-dimensional place. I also paint, and people have often said to me that my work looks a lot like stage sets. So it seems, and I have done small toy theaters as well, but it's really makes sense with my idea, once again, of curating. These were three-dimensional books that were made. It's hard to see here, but they actually have 3 different layers on them, each one of the images, so that they're all dimensional, but again, along flat planes, and then kind of wind around the space. I had done this for a residency and exhibition in Munich that I was invited to do with an artist from Istanbul, from the U.S. consulate there. And I usually work small, and I usually work very labor-intensive, and I had basically a month to make an exhibition. And this was an idea that I had an interest in and wanted to develop. So I was busy working the whole month I had a nice budget, and I bought a small computer to proof everything, and the whole gallery was full of the proofs of these prints. But as you can see, I start off with the actual photograph and then take out all the color and start manipulating them. I had wanted to create a whole series of these three-level books. And in this image, you can see it a little better with the shadows of where it's actually hand-cut and put together for each page. This is the first in my series of cranes over Europe. I had been taking lots of photographs of cranes for years. I was from New York, and I was used to seeing large cranes in New York, and suddenly they started proliferating all over Europe when I was here, and started documenting them, and both documenting the buildings that were being torn down and the ones, and just the beauty of the cranes themselves too. It can go both ways. And these are this is actually a tabletop, and as I said, I want to create a whole series of these books at different levels to fill a whole room of them. This is my Lost book. This was also done in collaboration. This was a project after the bombing of Al-Mutanabbi Street in Iraq, and there was a call out to a lot of book artists to contribute something to this exhibition. It wasn't very limited. They just said, do what you want, just make sure that it's not too heavy, that they can, because it was supposed to be exhibited all over the world. And it still is going that way. And it was difficult because here I was doing a touchy kind of subject matter. As an American, I was responsible for the efforts here, and I'm going to go faster. All right, and this is my city stamp book, which is, again, manipulated pictures, and I want to get into my curating here. So this is the Dialogue, which was one of the first, the biggest of my international projects, and it was 3 venues in New York and 3 in Paris. They were 3 venues with the same artist, and so you can see how the different venues, and gave me an opportunity to play with the space. Even though it was a similar work. This was a space I curated for a while in the play exhibition for Proteus Gowanus in Brooklyn. It no longer exists either. And you can see how I'm starting to incorporate the books and the library aspect into larger exhibitions of all media. That's a blank page. And this is the beginning of central booking. And our first home in Dumbo. And this is the Artist Book Gallery. It was always a 2-space gallery. And we did exhibitions quarterly on art and science exhibitions. And our first one was Natural Histories. And this was an artist book artist who I commissioned to do an installation piece. So she does a lot of site-specific installation pieces as well. This was the next show up, and this was a book from an artist who works in steel. And she does books at all different sizes, but you can see this was a book you were meant to enter. She also works a lot with Mali. She goes back and forth from New York to Mali. This is our second space in Dumbo, a little bigger, more expansion of the artist book gallery. I showed over 160 different artists that are on my roster internationally. And this is our new space that was down the hallway, and our new first exhibition there called The Celestial. And you can see how, even though they're art and science exhibitions, I've incorporated the book very much into the space. And I think very much of space when I'm curating is, for me, space is basically using other people's artwork found objects and creating a space within it. This is Measure for Measure, which is one of our math shows. That was also in the old space. These are, this is a show that I did of gallery artists in Berlin. That's blank. This is a show I did of gallery artists in New Orleans. And again, for this space, they had lots of pedestals and no shelves. So I adapted to creating the space with the pedestals. This was another space, Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. And again, it gives me a chance to expand what I can show, more three-dimensional, more larger works in these exhibitions than I can show just at the Artist Book Gallery or even by taking away. This was our last space in Les, Lower East Side of Manhattan. We were here for 5 years and just recently moved. And this, we had much more space. It was 2,700 square feet. Don't know how many square meters that is, but it was large. And we had 4 different spaces within the space as well in the gallery. And this was the Artist Book Gallery up front. Oops, up front. This is one of the exhibitions, Twisted Data on Eugenics, that I did. Again, combining books with other media. This was Plant Cure. This was an exhibition I did along with a residency at the New York Academy of Medicine up in Uptown Manhattan, which has an amazing library of all kinds of medical, botanicals, even recipe books. And we created 5 residencies for artists for the first 6 months, and they created work to go into the exhibition. This used all 3 spaces, exhibition spaces of the gallery. Again, these artists did all kinds of work, and I myself was invited to be the token 6th person. So I enjoyed the residency as well and made some work from it. And it incorporated other work from artists who's already works on the theme. And this I hope to be a traveling exhibition as well. And that's it.
So, hello everyone. So, my name is Antoine Lefebvre, which is one of the most common names in France. So, that's why I chose as an artist name to be Antoine Lefebvre Edition. So this way people won't mix me up with other artists named Antoine Lefebvre. So in 2008, I started a practice-based visual art PhD. And I managed to have a funding, and the project that I proposed them was to create a publishing project that would therefore make me an artist publisher. The problem was that I had absolutely no idea how to publish books and with which money. So being interested mostly in conceptual art, I realized that I didn't have to find tons of money to print tons of books, but that instead I could create a website on which I would put the PDF of the books that I wanted to publish, and that people can create them themselves by printing them and stapling them. So that's what I did. It's called La Bibliothèque Fantastique, and it's the the practice side of this PhD, meaning that my research is based on my own artistic practice. So that's what the website looked like in the beginning, and those are examples of books that all had a cover taken from an already existing book, and the content is mostly text-based, relating to literature, poetry, or conceptual art. So the name La Bibliothèque Fantastique comes from an essay by Michel Foucault of the same name, which is titled The Fantasia of the Library in English. And I specifically used this quote to create the project, meaning that this quote was more or less like a program for my project. So I'm just going to read it with you. The imaginary now resides between the book and the lamp. The fantastic is no longer a property of the heart, nor is it found among the incongruities of nature. It evolves from the accuracy of knowledge, and its treasures lie dormant in the document. Dreams are no longer summoned with closed eyes, but in reading, and the true image is now a product of learning. It derives from words spoken in the past, exact recensions, the amassing of minute facts, and the reproductions of reproductions. In the modern experience, these elements contain the power of the impossible. Only the assiduous clamor created by repetition can transmit to us what only happened once. The imaginary is not formed in opposition to reality as its denial or compensation. It grows among signs, from book to book, in the interstice of repetitions and commentaries. It is born and takes shape in the interval between books. It is a phenomenon of the library. So the idea with this publishing project was to create what Foucault calls a phenomenon of library, which is in his words, intertextuality somehow. The way books relate to each other, the way they dialogue with each other. And so that's the whole project when it was close to the end. And so I did this project, and then I stopped it in 2013 in order to draw back and take a look at what I've done in order to theorize about it. And among the different things that I discovered working on this, there was the idea that this phenomenon of library has a lot to do with what a publisher does, meaning that you won't name yourself a publisher if you only publish one book. Therefore, you have to publish several books in order for them to dialogue with each other and create a phenomenon of library. So this phenomenon of library and the way books dialogue with each other is what I found to be common between librarians and artist books and artist publishers. So that's why I staged myself in this video that you will find on the website of La Bibliothèque Fantastique, and playing a part somehow, the part of the librarian of this fantastic library. So that's the set of the video that I shot that presents La Bibliothèque Fantastique. And so the second thing that I found, our key points about this research, is that in order to call yourself a publisher or an artist publisher, you shouldn't be only publishing yourself. There are a lot of artists who make a lot of books, but the ones that only publish their own books, to me, remain in a studio practice, which is not necessarily open to a dialogue with different artists and authors. So that's the second thing. And I'll just show you how so that's what the website looks like now. So there are 40 different artists, and on each page for each artist you will find books that you can download. Then on this page should be the video, but it doesn't seem to work on this computer. And then there's this very specific way of showing La Bibliothèque Fantastique, which was important to me. What was important to me was that people could take the book in order to read them. So they're not nailed into the wall, they're just put on each nail. And And that's the same video. So the whole idea of this way of displaying is that I don't necessarily need to be here to create this installation. And a lot of times, like this one, which was the first time it was exhibited, I just sent the PDF, and the curator organizing the show takes on to make the books and create the installation. So when you were speaking earlier, Joakim, about places for books, the whole idea is that La Bibliothèque Fantastique is both a project and a place, but it's a place that can be created in a different space each time. So this is that. And then that's what my PhD dissertation looked like, and that's the presentation that I did on the day I presented it. And so the images come from, actually in the text La Bibliothèque Fantastique, Michel Foucault is commenting on Gustave Flaubert's The Temptation of Saint Anthony. And so when Foucault published his essay the first time, commenting on Flaubert, he went to search for the engravings that Flaubert was looking at when writing The Temptation of Saint Anthony. So. And the last thing that I discovered somehow when I was doing this research, or the thing that led me to another project, is that this way of making books was inspired a lot by conceptual artist books, but it was also in the way I made it. There were not only artist books, but there were also zines or fanzines. So I don't know if you are all familiar with this, but zines are self-published, self-distributed, sometimes self-authored booklets that are most of the time photocopied and widely, not necessarily widely distributed. And so when I started thinking about what I did in La Bibliothèque Fantastique, I realized that my publications were artist books, but that they were also zines, and that they were also at the conjunction of both, and therefore they were artist zines. So when we talk about zines, the first zines were created in the 30s and the 40s. They were made by science fiction fans who wanted to connect with each other when science fiction wasn't considered as something serious enough to be published by actual publishers. And then the great time of zines was more in the 70s with the apparition of the photocopy and the punk zines who created the do-it-yourself ethos that is still surviving today. So when I finished my PhD, someone, Phil Aarons, not to name him, commissioned me to write a book about zines made by artists, but I had no idea how to make a book. So the thing that I did was to create an online database that would show my research as it was going on. So on this website, you will find pages for a lot of artists that I met. And lots of them, about half of them, have a video, which is this black square, with an interview that I did of these people and some scans and documentation about all these zines. So until it becomes a book, I also started publishing my research as zines about zines, or meta-zines. So there are 11 of them so far, and one of them, this yellow one, is sold out. And so each of them are about either a city or an artist. So there are, that's about Paris, that's Tokyo, Montreal, California, Berlin. And there are two of them about only one artist. This one is about Mark Fisher, and that's from Temporary Services and Public Collectors. And there's one also about G. Voucher from the punk band Crass. And there's one last project that I wanted to talk to you about, because it has been ongoing for quite a while, since 2015, when Farah Khalil, a Tunisian artist that I worked with on La Bibliothèque Fantastique, she came to me and showed me this object. I will pass it around, but it's an Arabic dictionary that has been eaten by something. And so she found this in the belongings of her grandfather when he passed away. And she was fascinated by this object, the way that it was destroyed, and also because her grandfather was an intellectual, he was an Arabic teacher, he was also very spiritual. And so she wanted to collaborate with me on a project about this idea of bookworms that exist in several different languages. There's the same idea in French. We call rat bibliothèque, library rats, the people who love books. And in a lot of different languages, there is this idea that people who love books and devour them metaphorically are compared to the rodents or or bugs that actually eat them. So this project that was shown in New York, in Sidi Bou Said, and in Paris is a development on this idea of book loving, of the relationship between book loving and book eating. So we did this artist book, which is 500 copies, with the 108 pages that were left intact by whatever ate this. It's actually not a bookworm, but more of a mice. And so we emptied all of the content of the book in order to fill it with our own content. So we commissioned a few texts to different writers. And then there is an intervention by Farah, which is an excerpt from a video of hers. And there are shapes cut by insects in pages of books like this. And there's also a video that I wish I had time to show you, but it's 12 minutes, and we shot it in the library of Avranches near the Mont Saint-Michel, where they keep the manuscript made by the monks in the Abbey of the Mont Saint-Michel. And the librarian took outside of a box, outside of a plastic bag, inside of a plastic bag, there was books that were completely eaten by worms. So we had the chance to open them for the first time, and what you will see in the video, I can send you a link if you want, is all of these books crumbling into dust. That's it. Thank you. So if you want to pass it along.
I will just start to say something about a short introduction to my own work, and then I will tell a little bit about our studio, Grafikverkstan, Godsmagasinet, that Joakim mentioned before, and a few examples of books made by other artists in our studio. But this is a book I have made, and I'm not a graphic designer, and I'm not a poet, and I'm not an illustrator, and I'm not a publisher, but I make books. So this word "make" is kind of keyword to me. In this book, there's no text and there's no images, but the only content, so to speak, is space. And when you talk about artist books, sometimes you use that as an expression, the alternative space. So you can see this book as a comment to that expression. I also work quite a lot with typewriters. This is an example with, it's a combination of typewriting and drawing. So both these books are one-of-a-kind books. They're not edition, but the book object is actually one of the white book object. It's called Booked Room, and it's one object of from a series of 16 different books with different architectural spaces. And there is several versions of these typed books as well, but they are all different. So I prefer to call them one-of-a-kind books. But when I edition books, I normally work with letterpress. And this is a series of 10 different editioned books with letterpress. When I started working with books and get interested in books in the early 90s, it was very much about the book object, as the first example showed. the book as the format of a book. How can I use the format and the structure of the book? But to work with letterpress, to me it meant it gave me an opportunity to work with text as well, words and letters also as objects. So that was a connection to me. I started with a book as an object, and I continued to work with the text as object. It has had a very big impact on my way of writing and my how I approach text at all when I work with my books. So most of them are letterpress printed, hand set with lead types and wood types. This is one of those booklets called Jag skriver inte, which means I do not write, but I tear the language apart. So this is an example how it could look. I work a lot with cut up. It's a kind of cut up, cutting up sentences, but also cutting up words with different fonts. This is a book with fragments of texts from Moa Martinson's books. It's a Swedish writer called Moa Martinson. And I used her books, her texts. I won't show you the inlay, but you can tell from the cover as well how I cut up her name, Moa Martinson, in different angles. And the reason I made this book was that I got, well, this is how it looks on the press when I printed the cover. But the reason I made this book was that I got a public commission in Stockholm to design a square called Moa Martinson Square. So I worked with the same setting of types on the square. This is on the square. Her name. So this was really, to me, it was like a dream coming true. Being able to handle the types that are normally so small and to make them very big, like really big sculptures. So there you can see the scale. And in the ground around the sculptures, there are text fragments from her books as well. So the whole square is like a book. Moa Martinsons torg in Stockholm. So I will mention something about how I normally show my books and how I spread my books. Until just a few years ago, it was always connected to exhibitions, because it's not a big step for me. It's no difference actually between making a drawing or making a print for the wall or making a book. So I've always just presented them together and having readings sometimes in the exhibition or performances with typewriters in the exhibition. This is Västerås Konstmuseum. But it's also, I think, even though I've worked with the book format since early 90s, I have stayed within the gallery context, the art context, and that's the main reason for that is actually that there hasn't been any place in Sweden or Scandinavia that has been natural to approach with artist books. Now it has changed quite a lot, but I guess we will talk more about that after our presentations. And I mentioned that to make is a keyword, and sometimes I just leave the equipment for my performances in the exhibition. Everything belongs to each other, and I actually like very much to use cabinets. It's very common that people say, "Oh, it's awful to have books in cabinets and to have them under glass and things." But I really like the combination of having the opportunity to arrange a cabinet with bits and pieces, maybe one book and objects and things. It's like small exhibitions within a cabinet, and you put the cabinet as one chapter in the exhibition. I would rather, I often think of my exhibitions as books. The exhibition is like a book with different chapters instead of the opposite, to compare the artist book as an exhibition, you know. The opposite is more accurate to me anyway. But I also use shelves, as you can see here, so to make people being able to interact with the books and to turn pages and to handle the books. Or plinths in the exhibition, as you had used as well, Maddy. But it's when I use plinths, it's always to invite people to look at the book and turn pages in the book and to handle the book. But the last few years, I've taken part in a few artist book fairs, primarily in England, and I really enjoy that. It's a very different way to present your work in a book fair. It's a much more direct. You get much more direct feedback from the audience, and you can discuss books very naturally, and you meet colleagues. I mean, so it's a very big difference to show your books in fairs instead of just in exhibitions. But I mean, it's both quite important to me, both ways of presenting your work. So that was my work, and now I will say something about the studio we run in Uttersberg. It's a small village in the center of Sweden, and I run it together with my husband. It's an old warehouse. It used to be a mining village, quite big 100 years ago, because they have had mining industry there. So this warehouse is from that period, but we turned it into a print studio. Is it 9, almost 10 years ago now? And here are the studio managers, myself, my husband, Lars Nyberg, and the studio cat, Laban. This is the part of the studio we use for letterpress. It's an old Stanhope press in front, and we have a proofing press behind it, and quite a lot of different fonts to use. And the idea with the studio is that we have the possibility to invite artists, poets, graphic designers, people that has a project they want to work with, and they can stay in a guest apartment we have next to the studio. So regularly we have guest artists coming to work with their own projects. I will just show a few examples. This is Jamie Murphy from Dublin. He's running Salvage Press, and he's working very much within the private press tradition, you can say. So he's both a printer and graphic designer. And he made this in our studio a few years ago. This is Jim Berggren, a Swedish artist from Gothenburg. He has his own studio in Gothenburg, but he came to us to finish this book project that he started at Grafikverkstan Dresden in Germany. Because we have an exchange with Grafikverkstan in Dresden. So he came from there and finished the book in our studio. It's called Lunar Manual. And it's his prints, but also text by Ragnar Strömberg, a poet, Swedish poet. Chateau is a poetry press. It was founded, I think it was 2012. And when they started their poetry house, they came up to our studio to learn how to work with hand setting and letterpress. So the first book they published, they had no experience at all, but the first book they published where they printed the cover with lead types. And then they continued, and now the technique of working with letterpress has become very important to their practice as the whole Chateau publishing company. They work a lot with letterpress now, which is really nice. This is a book by an American poet. By the way, most of those books will be available on my stand during the fair. This is a Swedish artist called Liv Strand. She started her project down in Berlin and then came up to our studio to finish a series of posters she worked with. And Susan Ewenknecht, Geffen Press, from London. She came with her colleague Catherine Meynell to work with a project called Poetry of Unknown Words. And one of the signatures in that book, they decided to produce and print in our studio. I think they had the release in November last year or something. There's the print. Sharon Lee, based in London, printmaker, visual artist. She made this book with, which is intaglio printed, dry point and some kind of collage technique. And Lisa Shang Li from Beijing, now based in London. It's also dry point images in this loose leaf booklet. So yes, we work with dry point and intaglio as well. This is a Krause press in our studio. Okay, except making books, we we also arrange seminars. So this image is from a seminar about typewriting. We invited Jesper Olsson from Linköping University to give a lecture about typewriters' history and typewriting, concrete poetry made by typewriters, with typewriters, book publishing, where the typewriter has based on typewriting, basically. So that was an example of a seminar we gave. But sometimes we have, instead of lectures, we arrange, as in this case, a program with readings and performances in the studio. I really like the idea of having arrangements in the studio. I mean, close to, you show the books and you have the performance very close to the presses that produced the book. And, you know, I really like that connection, to use the studio that way. We call this program The Table as a Stage, Arbetsbordet som scen. And last thing I want to mention is a project we realized last year in collaboration with Codex Polaris. The idea came up during a seminar we had in Uttersberg. We had invited 8 or 9 artists from different countries in the different Nordic countries. And Imi Moff from Norway came up with this idea to realize Nordic letterpress collaboration. So we invited 24 artists, poets, graphic designers all over the northern countries that have the possibility to work with letterpress or work primarily with letterpress. And the reason we wanted to do this was a big reason anyway. One of the main reasons was to have to make a research about who is working with letterpress around the northern countries, because it's not as common as it is in England, for example, or in the States. So it was quite interesting to find people in all countries, and we invited them to do something with the envelope as a format, and we put it together. We printed a catalog as well in an envelope, of course, and put it together as a box. And this box will also be available at Codex Polaris stand during the fair. We had the release at Bergen Artist Book Fair in October last year. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you.
Good evening. First, I'd like to say thank you to the Kunsthal and the Malmö Artist Book Biennale for the opportunity to be here, to show work and to discover other work and to discover Malmö. So thank you. Okay, sort of various hats, but first I thought I'd introduce my own practice, my own work. Artist books. As whatever definition or lack of definition people kind of find for artist books or argue over, I kind of tend to think as a basic that it's artists using a book as the most appropriate medium for the realization of a particular concept or expression. And my work, and I make books, books have turned out to be a particularly appropriate medium because my subject is not so much books, but it's the very intangible relationship of the experience of books. So that meeting of the materiality of books, which I think is a very essential aspect, and the intellectual kind of assimilation of it, the kind of reading of the book, the thinking of the book, and the return to the material book. Basically, the fact that you have a book in your hands, and that awareness comes and goes in levels of kind of consciousness. So I'll just run through some examples of my work. What should I say? I should add that the aspects of reflexivity, of kind of going to the book and back, in a way is doubled in this practice, in as much as my books also come from existing books, existing works of literature. So that intangible kind of movement in time, a kind of in the space of time, that I'm interested in, I also have found in works of writing, of fiction. So I bring the two together, basically. As I say, I'll run through this quickly. I'll mention this. So, based on putting this together here, works of literature is a text. So it references a text, but as I've already said, the important text is the text of the materiality of the book. So the book, the structure of the book, the feel of the paper, the print, the whole kind of awareness in your hands of a book. So the two come together in this shadows of a reading. And the book I was reading that the shadows came from is a novel by Nathalie Sarraute, Vous les entendez. This one referencing the uncut pages as books used to be, especially in France, up to fairly recently. And this is a novel by Alain Robbe-Grillet, Dans le labyrinthe. I won't go into detail. This book, and I'll come back to libraries, is very much about library. It references the fact that Walter Benjamin's papers were hidden during the war in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris by his friend Georges Bataille. And this book is the whole text, the material text of Robert Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy. If you imagine the ink that constitutes the text in a very large book pooled together, this is a circle of that ink reformatted into a book. Most of the pages are black. Some have the edge of that circle. Here, a collaboration with Sophie Loss from Rabelais, Gargantua, referencing his playfulness of words and writing, the sound and the materiality of words. And lastly, this one, rubric, with in mind La Quête du Saint Graal, Quest of the Holy Grail, 13th century tale. So books and books from books and books to books. As Antoine mentioned, the intertextuality of books, and before Antoine, Foucault, and before Foucault, Flaubert. So books talk to each other. Another part of my practice is to put together exhibitions of books. This particular one is titled The Index Card as Writing Machine. So directly indexing writers like the photograph Arno Schmidt, who used index cards, notation on index cards, and the material shuffling of cards to kind of create text sort of quite explicitly, and other works by artists where that aspect of fragmentation and mutability is a particular sort of relevance. The exhibitions tend to be in art spaces, or more often the libraries of art spaces. So this one was the library of the Henry Moore Institute, Sculptural Institute in Leeds. So books, but books that essentially are first and foremost, they have that intimacy of books in your hand. But as has been mentioned already tonight, books need to be out in the world and out in space. So other aspects of my work is book fairs. As Lina mentioned, book fairs have this amazing advantage of being able to handle the work, unlike those in the previous slide, which were necessarily and unfortunately on the glass. So you can handle the work. Not only that, you can talk to the makers, you can discuss the books. The books are immediately open to a wider discourse. So with a colleague, Chris Taylor, more about him soon, we started a book fair in Yorkshire. This was not an alternative, a kind of a complement to the London Artist Book Fair, which had been going for a couple of years then. And I say a couple of years, this was our first one, and it was 21 years ago. So it was an alternative in the sense that it wasn't in London, it was in the geographic centre of the British Isles. And the other thing was, necessarily due to cost of venues, the London one was kind of relatively expensive to participate in. And ours, we ran it initially on a cost basis. So the fee that the participants paid just covered the cost. And we were able to do that because the venue was covered, it was kind of donated, so to speak. So this first one, which ran for a few years in Halifax in Yorkshire, was a business park, but with a very strong cultural program. Galleries, concerts, commissions. So the owners welcomed us in our book fair. We moved from there to the main court of Leeds University. This space was in the main building of the university, and the space itself is between the university library on one side and the university gallery on the other. And lastly, we are now, and have been for the last 5 years, in the Tetley, which is a new art centre in Leeds, in Yorkshire. It was the headquarters of a brewery, and now it's a very active art centre. Again, we work in partnership with the space and the venue, and that enables us to have the book fair. Because the book fairs are so basic. It's a market in the sense that you have a table, you have the books, you have an audience, and you have the makers, the producers of the books. So very simple, not to be changed really. But as we've gone along over the last 21 years, we've been awarded grants and bursaries, and that's enabled us to have a much wider program around the hub, the centre of that book fair. Here it's a performance, singing books by Elizabeth Clark, the artist. We've also produced exhibitions, seminars, conferences, commissioned works, book works, essays, I can't think, a lot of kind of work that comes from the book and is of the book in terms of artist books. This is a large exhibition at the gallery at Leeds, and here, as you can see, some of the books, historic examples borrowed from institutions, are in glass cases. Other books are open to be sort of handled and enjoyed in a different way. This was mentioned. This funding enabled us to purchase books, purchase a selection of books over 2 years' book fairs, and these put into this specially built cabinet, which is now outside in the bookshop, has come all the way from England. So please do go to see that. So we've tried to get a wide selection of books from the artists that participate in the book fair. By selection, I mean representing different sort of material structures, different self-published, commercially published, different approaches to the kind of use of the book and the book structure. This was last year, our 20th anniversary. We put on an exhibition, a survey exhibition of the previous work done by then we called ourselves Pages as a kind of umbrella term for our projects. This is my colleague, Chris Taylor, who is an artist, an academic and a publisher, and his imprint, Wild Pansy Press, will be at the book fair this weekend. So that's us contemplating the future, I guess. I mentioned commissions. One thing we've always done right from the very start is produce a substantial catalogue. So something that documents the participants in the book fair in terms of contacts, statements, images of their work, but also augmented by, at different times, essays by various professionals and interested sort of parties in the field of artist books. We've commissioned original bookworks for the page of the catalogues, and we've there's also text works relating to the exhibitions we put on in conjunction with the book fairs and the host institutions. So that's Pages. The other arm of my sort of where kind of books go out in the world is I work with a group named AMBruno, and this is a group of artists who they have individually very different practices in terms of they might be painters, video makers, performers, drawing, sculptors, but in common they have an interest in the book. So they came together as a way of supporting their work and showing their work and disseminating their work, sort of many more than the one, and showed their work at a book fair. Initially, that was good, but they found that the books were so diversified, so formally and conceptually varied that they just barely spoke together. They spoke together all at once, so to speak. So they came up with the proposal that, one, to make sure new books were shown at such events, but a proposal that the new books should be made in response to a theme, to a given theme. And from then, that's exactly what they did. This one is the Whitechapel, the London Book Fair at the Whitechapel Gallery, and the theme is lines. So again, the books are very different, as you can see, in kind of form and structure and look. And yet, here, literally, there's a line, a thread running between them. It could be a formal or intellectual one. Formal threads, like one project I set was a black circle. So the books had black circles. It could be a color, red. So red runs through the books. Just some examples. One example from one project, words. So here, a play with words, structuring, breaking down, reforming the kind of meaning and sense of language through their constituent parts. This project was a year ago. It's SIC, S-I-C, as in sic erat scriptum, the deliberate mistake. So this was in square brackets. Here is a book. this is letterpress, and it plays with the breaking down of a calendar. It plays between the strictures of time in terms of a calendar and the fantasy of storytelling and kind of imagination. I abbreviate. This year's project was cover in terms, obviously, of book cover and any metaphoric or allusional sort of meanings of the word cover. This book by Judy Goldhill plays with that. AMBruno, as well as sort of producing these books, I should have said that the group isn't a fixed group. It's mutable in the sense that people respond, are invited or put in proposals in answer to these given themes and projects. Books are selected. So what makes up the final exhibition of books, say 12, 15, 16 books at any given time, is continually changes year by year as time progresses, because new people come in, other people don't participate. So it's a very fluid group. They've diversified, perhaps for lack of a better term, into prints. So a couple of a project was to produce a print to a given theme, but a single print. And this one was based on a line from Jeanette Winterson's novel The Passion. Trust me, I'm telling you stories. So to produce one work, one page, so to speak, from whatever comes to mind from many pages of a novel. Another project, this is in New York, called 101. It was to produce a film, a silent film, no sound, but a film, and the constraint for that was that the film had to be exactly 101 seconds in duration. So everything open, but the very formal constraint of duration. And the films were shown in a gallery that is accessed through the window. So the plate glass of the gallery on the street can be accessed 24 hours a day. This is on Lexington and 47th, so very busy place up from Grand Central. And last image, this is the Words project at the New York Art Book Fair. So the space is a book. It's kind of so varied, and you have a fair like New York, which I've experienced, and it's very busy. It's very exciting. It's very full on though. For sort of 3.5 days, people are constantly sort of there at the book. So again, it's the wonderful thing of being able to have the book in your hands, but that aspect of kind of reflection and time some books desire. Book fairs can be seen also as an initial introduction to the work, perhaps, in some cases. So yes, so that's my kind of involvement with books, really. Thank you.
We'll have a short break now. There is, of course, refreshments to buy in the cafe. And I will sound the horn when it's time to come back. Part where we're seated at the table. And it's open for discussion and questions from the audience. Remember that Anders has got a mic, and we would very much like you to talk into the mic so we get it on film as well. So there's not much time left. Does anyone have a question, or should I ask one? Yeah? I was thinking a bit about the architectural aspect of the book. You showed some examples, Maddy, and Lina also showed a beautiful example of the book you could almost walk into. I would like you to expand a little on that. when does a book become something else?
Well,
Tricky question.
again, I think as an artist, you just make work and then somebody else puts categorizations on it. I don't go, oh, this has to be a book or this has to be a painting or whatever. But I think as much as John said, is that you go to a certain medium because that's the best way to express a particular idea as an artist. So for me, it's more, when does an artwork become a book? Then a book becomes an artwork. So it's, and again, I don't worry too much about those definitions. Even in my curating, I don't either. It's, I work with artists to really push the idea of that, of what a book is, and work with all different kind of media. I've had people who say to me, well, you know, how digital, it's going to destroy the book. And I said, no, it's just another medium we can play with to create book work. Again, you know, I think as artists, we just embrace every form. And for me, a book is the books that we deal with, the Codex book that we're familiar with, is a sculpture in itself. It's already a three-dimensional object. So if you look at it more as an object than just a container of information, then you start seeing, well, what is a book is something more than just a bunch of words in it, and the words, how they're put on the page and how they're designed. Every aspect of that, somebody thought about. And as an artist, we think about every specific piece of it. Now, as I say, I've always responded to architectural buildings and spaces and such, and I think that really references my growing up in New York. Although I never wanted to draw people. It was interesting. With all the people around me, I just took away all the noise and just dealt with the environment. And you can see architecturally, I create spaces as well. So it's not just a visual element. It really is about moving objects around in space. And even when I'm working with two-dimensional, to break up those into planes of space. And you know, that's pretty much how the world is.
Do you have a comment on this, Lina?
Well, one part of the reason I made this very clearly architectural spaces in the books is that I'm very inspired by architect drawings and mapping and that kind of images. But it was also, I was also thinking about it as a metaphor for the experience of reading a book. I mean, page by page, you enter another world. And in my book, you can enter the book step by step. So it's like a metaphor for the experience of reading.
Funnily, I connected it to Antoine's La Bibliothèque Fantastique, because since you came after Antoine, I immediately thought that was the entrance to the library, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question for Antoine as well about zines. Since I started myself doing zines a long, long time ago, music zines. What's the attraction with zines? Why did you?
So the idea behind that research project that is still ongoing is that there were several different key moments for zines. I talked about the first one that were about science fiction, about the great moment of punk zines. And at this time, zines were made mostly for people to connect with each other, to share their passion. And it was a network that was building and through information that they wanted to share. And what I'm analyzing in this project is that there is a resurgence since 2000, 2005 of self-publishing. There are more and more young people who are making zines, and those people have never known or even encounter a music zine like the one of the 80s and the 90s. And so to me, the idea between art zines is that it's the same kind of direction, this do-it-yourself ethos, but the zines that are made today, they're not made to connect people with each other or to pass information, because that can be done through internet. But so they have less information and more art somehow, and they're more artistic in this way because they are more gratuitous. They're made just to make something and to share it. And also the other reaction of because of internet is that so young people are being told that the future is internet and that they have to spend their whole day on Facebook, and actually they don't want to spend their whole day on Facebook. They would rather gather on weekends and show each other what they have made and share it. And so that's what this project is about.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a question. Wait for the mic, please.
Do you see a future for artist books in e-books?
Who would like to answer that?
In e-books?
Maybe you.
E-books?
That's one thing. When I did La Bibliothèque Fantastique, I thought that people would make the books, and actually no one printed them. So that's how I started printing them and showing them in book fairs and in exhibitions. And I think there are material that can work as e-books, but I think that mediums are not mutually exclusive, and that's not because there is a new technology that it will necessarily kick the other out.
Do you know if some artists have made artist books in e-books?
Oh yeah, definitely. As I said, artists use every medium, and if there's new medium, I have actually Con Selesnik, who do very beautiful, traditional, huge, one-of-a-kind books, and they're working on an e-book now as well. As I say, every medium presents a different problem and different excitement that you can't do in other media. So one does not negate another. It's just something else for to play with. And as the medium matures, you'll get more artists working within it and seeing what they can do with it.
And also, when you talk about e-books, there must have been like dozens of different formats of e-books since they were created. And once I had this academic project that we wanted to publish, and we went through a publisher that was specialized in e-books, and he told us, so that's the price to make the graphic design and production and distribution of the e-book, but you might have to pay in 2 years because it won't be readable anymore. So that's how books are much, much, much stronger than e-books. It's because if you have old formats, like musical formats, there's a very good chance that you can't read them anymore, those old cassettes or this kind of thing. And it's the same with e-books, whereas a book will, if it's taken care of, it will still be readable in hundreds of years.
And that is the problem. I mean, I know a lot of artists and book artists who work with digital media and such, and it's changed so rapidly that, you sell something to a library that's in one format. Do you have to keep on, upgrading that format? And a lot of libraries have actually stopped buying because they've seen how fast the technology changes. They prefer just to buy old paper or something that is tangible that they know will last and not be outdated.
I have a question about the Fantastic Library, and you have to speak about intertextuality, and how this assemble of books is made, and if you can elaborate a little bit how this collection of books has been made, and if it's still growing, or is because the PhD is finished that the project is finished?
Yes, I finished the project in order to take a look back at what I've done. So there was about 100 different books on it that were produced by 40 different artists, and there's also a side that I don't necessarily show in this kind of event because I don't publicize a lot about it because it's illegal. There's a lot of pirated artist books, so copies of famous artist books that are bootlegged and put online. There's also a lot of stuff by the international situationist. And in the books that I produced with different artists, there are a lot, most of them have a cover that is taken from an already existing book, in which we erase the name of the artist to replace it with we erase the name of the original author to replace it with the artist, the name of the artist. And then it's mostly text, because it's a lot of play on language, because of this idea of intertextuality, and also because as I was preparing both the practice side and the theory side of my PhD at the same time, there was a great connection between what I was reading and what I was working on with different artists or in my own practice. So, and to be more specific, when we talk about intertextuality, it's often Barthes who started theorizing it, and then Julia Kristeva, and then there's Gérard Genette who talked about a lot of different sets of interaction that books may have to one another. So there's paratextuality, which comes from the paratext. So all of the text that isn't the main text in a book, so the title and the colophon and this kind of thing. And yeah, so Gérard Genette considers 5 different type of relationships.
Sorry.
I would like to ask about the website as a potential object, in a sense that the book as an object and text as an object, from the perspective of internet offering different possibilities to browse, and it's somehow multi-dimensional in other ways than a book. And my question is whether you can consider a website in an equivalent way to an artist book, if it is made in a unique...
It depends on intentionality. So I would say that a lot of websites, no, they're not meant to be an artist book, but I can see artists who actually use a website to create an artist book. Why not? It's page by page by page, so there's a sequence you can make. I'm going to explore a lot of curating online too, which I haven't been able to do. So it offers up possibilities. Are you a book artist?
No. What I wanted to, in fact, I forgot to mention this aspect. There is a difference between proprietary software, this ready-made kind of frame in which you put your content, and open source software and free software in which you can sort of bricolage your own website, very much handmade. So you don't just put it in WordPress or anything like that. So that's more what
but I was going to say is that it might be something that you can explore. It's an interesting idea because yes, you can custom make websites. Again, as I say, it's your intention, whether it's just it's the same thing with a book, you know, what you're using a book for. But if you can use a website to create your own artwork out of it, I don't see why not.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm a bit curious. You mentioned libraries. I mean, the fantastic library, and you, Maddy, you've shown some work in libraries. And I work as a librarian, and I'm also very interested in the artist book. And I find the problem in incorporating artist books in libraries because they're not usually in a format that is easily used in libraries. I'm interested if you have any experiences of your books being incorporated in a library?
Yeah.
As books in libraries.
No, it is very interesting. It's kind of interesting where artist books fit. So we've been talking about e-books, material books, and libraries. And I'm, as you might imagine, I'm very interested in the relationship between a book and a library in terms of practicalities. It's fascinating that it's often specialist libraries. So art institution libraries sort of think, artist books. And then it's characterized whether it fits in with curatorial policy rather than archival policy. Can I ask what library you work in?
School library.
Uh-huh.
It's actually a school that had all the aesthetic programs for teenagers, and so they will probably come to see a few things here, and they try to make their own artist books on a program, and so they wanted me to maybe have some books in the library, and yeah.
I would certainly encourage that because
Yes.
it's such a resource. So you can imagine, whether whatever level of education and up to specialist art education, to see those books, to have those books is kind of really invaluable. But you're saying that there's practical sort of kind of...
Yes, well, yeah, they're not mainstreamed, so it appears to be a problem where should they have their own shelf, how to fit them into the sorting system. It's a whole in a general library, and I make kind of artist books myself, and I have friends that makes them, and they're not often represented in libraries because they're often this without the what you call the rygg på svenska.
The spine.
The spine, yeah, they don't have a spine, and so libraries think no one will find these books, so we can't have them because they would just be standing there and have It's an interesting question.
As you say, it's a question also of categorization. There's a kind of political point where one might say books by artists are books. They should not be segregated, so to speak.
Sure.
And yet, this question of dialogue and the kind of recognition and engagement might benefit from a book or a set of books being called, these here are artist books. And in my experience, collections and libraries tend to have a named collection. So there's either a primary or subheading in the catalogue which says artist book collection, special collections, artist books. And I think there's possibly more benefit than any possible harm in that.
Now, maybe we will specialize in my library.
You should, because, I mean, they're usually in special collections or rare book collections, but they are in libraries. Most of my collections are libraries, whether university libraries or museum libraries, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be in high school. Most of the universities collect them, again, because they use them as teaching tools, so why not at a high school level?
Yeah, but I have to say something. You're from England and from the States, and it's a big difference if you compare to Scandinavia. I only know one library in Scandinavia that has been collecting seriously, consciously artist books, and that's Rickardingatans library. Rickardsgatans library in
I never heard of it. Okay.
Rickardinkatu.
Helsingfors.
In Helsingfors,
right.
yeah.
Yes, but in the
And
States...
it has been a discussion going on between libraries, and they even started a network to discuss this issue, artist books in library, like 10 years ago, but they just finished that. It doesn't exist anymore. And the Royal Library in Stockholm, they have, since a few years ago, started a special, to categorize a special category, artist books, but it's still not so many artist books there because it's so recent that they started this category. So it's
Yes, but the
not as
reason
it is
why
in
there's
England and
so
the
many in
States.
the US is they're normally started by somebody, either a librarian who's really interested or somebody who's teaching the course who really is interested. So again, yeah, you can be the one, you know.
Yes, I will try. Thank you.
And I can give I can say something else. There is a librarian in the Royal Library in Stockholm that originally was trained as an artist at Valand, and she wrote a thesis about artist books in libraries. And her conclusion was that if you put an artist book in a context of the library, it becomes a document, because an artist book has to be presented in the context of art to stay being as the definition of artist book.
But there's lots of libraries that collect art. They collect prints, they collect drawings, and so that's why, as I say, it's not necessarily outside the context of a library. It is something that skirts many worlds. It can be in the context of a library, it can be in the context of a museum. And we come back to this categorization problem. And it's only a categorization problem. It's more about access. In the library, a lot more people will have access to a collection than in a museum. So, again, a lot of artists are quite thrilled to have more people have access to their work and also to the idea of what a book is. The more people understand it, the more they make it, the more they're involved with it, the more it doesn't become this rarefied object that it still seems to be here. And I think that's a good thing, so push.
Yeah, I totally agree.
and talk to other collections around the world, and they can give you some pointers on how to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And I will have to talk to you about the
I think that was very good words to end with, because the gallery actually closes in 2 minutes. So, thank you, Maddy, John, Lina, and Antoine. Thank you very much for being here.